This is the stupidest form I've ever filled out. Even stupider than those mental health forms my doctor had me fill out when I told him I was experiencing depression. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being constantly, 1 being rarely, to what degree have you experienced suicidal thoughts in the last month? Yes, this is 1000% stupider. Describe your situation. Sounds normal enough. But let me tell you how unnormal my situation is. Imagine for a moment what it must be like to be a baby in a crib, staring up at the ceiling, going about your baby day, when suddenly a face appears from above. A big, smiling adult face staring right at you. Now, the baby is most likely to smile and laugh at seeing the face of another, right? Now I want you to imagine you're an adult, going about your business, catching the bus to work, and walking home if weather permits. When suddenly, from out of nowhere, a face appears. It's gigantic. It scares you. It's attached to a large body, as if coming out of the sky, but no one else sees it. You jump and close your eyes, bracing yourself for what feels like an object flying towards you because it is so close. Unscathed, you slowly open your eyes, and you are, for all intents and purposes, alone. You'd likely shrug that off as some animal or bird. But when it happens again and again, you start to get used to it. So you start to leave your eyes open in these episodes, which allows you to see this object a bit more clearly. It's a big, dark face. But it's not human. It's a shrewd impersonation of a human. It's smiling. It's reaching out to touch you. Now you close your eyes, only to open them again to your lonesome. This happens time and again. You start to lose it. You quit your job. You don't leave the house. You avoid the usual spots where you encounter the face, only to learn the darkest truth of all. It can appear in your home. There is nowhere you can feel safe. That's what it felt like to be plagued by the handler. That's the best way I can describe it. Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to another episode of Unsheet the Ghost, where I visit real-life ghost towns and debunk their haunted histories with reasonable explanations. You're listening to episode 47, where I visit the small Georgian town of Henderson, known for the hauntings of local murderer Tate Bloom. I went on their ghost tour and stayed a few extra days to explore the town, and I'm going to tell you all about it right now. Georgia was beautiful. More beautiful than where I was from, anyway. Tall green trees lined Highway 95 North as far as the eye could see. On my drive to Henderson, I made a bathroom break, hoping to get some lunch as well. The pit stop housed 2 stores, a McDonald's and a travel shop, which was the creative name of the service station next door. I started there on my search for a somewhat healthy lunch. A cool blast of air conditioning greeted me as I entered. They were sold out of everything hot, only chicken sandwiches remained, lit up in the back fridge. Not my first choice, but better than McDonald's. A woman entered the store in short, flowery workout pants and a black singlet that hung freely over her large belly. Hair ran past her shoulders, framing a small purple gemstone on a necklace tied around her neck. The service station owner was also an older woman. She was reading a book that looked as if it had been read several times before. I didn't catch the title. I found myself stuck looking at a very large wall displaying the same Georgian tourist mugs with a cartoon peach tree scenery. Each mug had a different name on it. I always look for my own name on these sorts of gifts, never successfully. Chet was the name given me by my father, a name I hadn't seen anywhere else. Back on the highway, I drove one-handed, wolfing down the chicken sandwich and thinking about my destination. Henderson is a couple of hours north of Savannah, and thanks to you loyal listeners, I had heard many things about the local ghost tour. The town called him the Handler. Reportedly, he digs up the graves of the dead and wears their clothes. And yes, I visited the cemetery, and I will be sharing all about that. As I mentioned, the birth name of the Handler was Tate Bloom. The story goes, when he was alive, at 63 years old, his wife was kidnapped, and when the kidnapper called him for ransom, he just said, "Keep her." Jessie Bloom, unfortunately, was kept forever. Her body found a month later, a few miles out of town, in an old Ford sedan. I've debunked over 50 ghost town tales here on Unsheet, and let me tell you, I am not very popular in the ghost town community. I've been threatened to have my name dragged through the mud, and I've been told that my show won't air one more episode after the trouble I'd gotten myself into. Is this the hill you want to die on? My producer Lana once asked me after receiving an over-the-top death threat, dictated by cliché magazine cutouts. Unfortunately, I'm willing to die on lots of hills. But the bright side is, that's what has made my show so successful. So far, these empty threats have resulted in entertaining hate mail that I love to read hyperbolically on the air from time to time. The only other consequence has been easy enough to combat. I've had instances where I haven't been let on certain ghost tours due to the fear of being shut down. So that's why I always travel with a disguise. All right, fourth wall going back up. I like to take my listeners on a journey with no interruptions. So, back to the story. A short distance past the Henderson Population 200 sign, I pulled into the local RV park, intending to rent one for the night. At first, I didn't know how long I'd stay. I was already in character, in case I got recognized. This weekend, I was sporting a long-sleeve red t-shirt, denim jacket, and a faded black cap with blonde hair tufting out of the sides. One day, I'd put my money towards real face prosthetics, and wouldn't that be a sight? My Ohio license read Chad Williams. I parked my car in one of the 3 guest spots and hiked up the narrow stairs to the makeshift RV office. Yes, even the office was an RV. Brody was the name on the badge of the skinny man behind the check-in counter. He wore dated, wiry-framed glasses, a yellow and black plaid button-up, and his fingernails looked like he hadn't washed them in weeks. It indicated to me that he could have been a mechanic, though he looked too skinny and too pale to do any work of that sort. He was a man of few words, yet politely showed me to my RV, a big cream beast with yellow stripes across the side. The layout was standard. Light brown cabinetry and walls, a double bed at the back. This one had a toilet as well as a shower that I was grateful to see. It reeked of cleaning products, but mercifully, the windows were open. A cool breeze was blowing in, making the fake roses on the table shift about unnaturally. Brody handed me the keys and left me to my own company. I had a few hours to kill before the ghost tour commenced that Friday night, so I unpacked and wandered around the park. There were 3 other guest RVs, no amenities like a pool or a restaurant that you would usually see, though, a couple of blocks down, Brody explained that there was a bar, cafe, and a few other stores which made up the town's main street. With the sun setting, the temperature was getting cooler. I combed my faked blonde hair behind my ears with my fingers and flipped through my notebook. Most ghost tours include real-life crimes done by real people, so the basis is always true. It gets wonky when the facts get blown out of proportion to include revisits from the dead due to the testimony from haunted locals. Usually, it was pretty easy stuff to debunk. The handler was different. The story goes that he is still digging up graves and wearing the clothes of the dead today. One easy way to prove that wrong. I was standing at the edge of the park when I had this thought and headed back to my RV to make some coffee for the evening. It would be a long night at the cemetery. Come 7 p.m., the tour group met on Smithfield Street, in the front yard of the house that used to belong to Tate Bloom. From there, the group would walk to the local cemetery off of Main Street. All up, the tour took about 2 hours. I counted 3 cars parked on the street from the tour group, some of whom had already begun to congregate on the sidewalk just outside of Tate's former residence. The house had a dark feel to it. Vines growing all around. The porch had stone arches that shadowed the large windows peering into the living room. Trees and bushes were scattered over the front yard, unkept, likely to add to the feel. I decided to join a group of 4, a man, woman, and 2 teenagers. Arriving at the same time was a man who introduced himself as Croft, the tour guide. He had that fake personality tour guides tend to adopt that somehow works at getting everyone to share and laugh and feel as if they are part of something. I was surprised to see that along with our tickets, Croft wanted to see our IDs. I was happy at least to put my fake license to good use. Croft stared at my license for a good 5 seconds before handing it back to me with a forced smile. He wore an old-style gray suit with a name tag that swung over his neck next to a Polaroid camera. His beard was scraggly and borderline unkempt. Somehow it blended in with his dark brown shoulder-length hair that was combed through carefully. Handing flashlights to each of us, he led the way to the front door with a key on a very large keychain from his pocket, and the tour commenced. In the small entranceway, Croft began his monologue. Just over a decade ago, Tate Bloom was the resident of this house alongside his wife, Jessie Bloom. The two didn't have day jobs. Rather, they collected Social Security checks. They did work about 10 years prior. Tate was a postman, and Jessie worked at the local pub as a waitress. The two had no children and no living relatives that we know of. Croft walked into the living room that housed 2 old black leather chairs, a fireplace with photos and trinkets on the upper shelving, and a desk with stacks of papers on top. You can see various photos of the two of them, including Jessie and Tate as children with their families, as well as their marriage photo in the middle. The 5 of us took turns peering at the photos on display, doing our best not to linger, allowing everyone to get a good look. I recognized one of the photos of Tate from online, the one in his postman attire. Photos of murderers like this always seemed eerily normal, though I guess not every murderer is born evil. Croft led us through the kitchen and upstairs to the only 2 bedrooms. He shared facts about Tate's childhood and his profession as a postal worker. In Tate's bedroom, we were shown a prosthetic leg and eye that apparently belonged to Tate. He had used them right up until his death. When we arrived in the smaller bedroom upstairs, Croft began sharing about Tate's crimes while alive. I couldn't help but feel that it was intentional that he saved the gruesome details for the most claustrophobic room in the house. This was the room where Tate Bloom committed his only murder. Ironically, the victim was a postman who had delivered Tate's mail to the wrong house across the street. Tate was feuding with his neighbor Eric over a noise complaint that Eric had made, resorting to him calling the police several times. Some say the lost mail was Social Security checks that Eric refused to hand over to Tate due to the grudge that they held. Ron Woodland was found murdered on this very bed, from a pair of scissors to the neck. It was Eric's calls to the police that allowed them to eventually search the premises after Tate had gotten rough with the officer on duty. Tate claimed innocence, even tried to blame the murder on Eric, though his prosthetic eye revealed Ron's blood smudged across the painted pupil, helping the officer on duty to make the decision to call for backup. The 2 teenage boys laughed awkwardly in shock. The man and woman just looked at each other. I watched Croft survey the response from his tourists. "What about him was real?" I asked. Croft paused before responding. "It's a fair question. Tate was a compulsive liar." "No, I mean, what about this house is real? Is there a title we can see with Tate's name on it?" Croft hesitated. "Title? Well, how do we know this isn't just some random house that's been decked out with props?" I asked the question like I was poking into him. Experience had shown that being somewhat aggressive with my objections could reveal a lot. "Why does he wear the clothes of the dead?" the woman asked, changing the subject. "He likes to pretend he is other people," said Croft, still glaring straight at me. I smiled back. "It does sound fun. Pretending to be someone you're not is not fun," Croft spoke sternly. Good to learn that he could be a little aggressive back to me. "How did he die?" I asked. "The handler was burned alive." "How?" one of the teenagers asked, the taller one who was snapping photos the whole time. "Why don't we make our way over to the cemetery? I can not only tell you how, but I can show you where." He raised one eyebrow, and led the way downstairs. The tourists liked that one. I was the last out of the room, and really, for no other reason than to be rebellious, I tried the light switch. It didn't work. Neither did the others I passed by on the way out front. I tried to make conversation with the middle-aged couple and the boys, but they were mostly happy chatting to themselves. I wanted to avoid Croft defaulting to being my walking partner, so I hung at the back of the group, making a few notes on my notepad. 10 minutes later, we rounded a corner to Henderson's humble cemetery. Some gravestones were on display, but the majority were small plaques above dirt ground with small bouquets of flowers, mostly fake. The moon was high in the sky, and the air was as cool as it would get that weekend. I lifted my backpack off of my shoulders, feeling my thermos move about. I was tired from the drive, and it would be a long night. We walked to the far end of the cemetery, Croft stopping to glance at us excitedly when we reached Tate's tombstone. When I saw it, I almost laughed. I am not joking when I say that the cemented stone had a detailed engraving of 3 skulls on top of it. The inscription read, Tate Bloom, 1920 to 1987. Lived life to the full. "This is his gravestone?" I asked in a flat tone. It looked like it was purchased from the local grocery store during a Halloween sale. I wouldn't be surprised if it was made of foam. The teenagers took photos as the other couple stood reverently. "Tombstone designed by Tate himself, 5 years before his death." I couldn't help but laugh now. What a joke. Croft went into detail about Tate's funeral service, even so far as to explain the weather the day of. It was here he chose to throw in the ghost stuff. "Every night since his death, Croft has risen from his grave at midnight. He digs through the graves of the fallen Henderson folk buried here, takes their clothes, and wears them around town. If you are awake at midnight tonight, perhaps glance out of your window and see if you can see the ghost of Tate Bloom trying to pass as a stand-up citizen in order to mask his own shame due to the violent crime he committed to Ron Woodland." Here, right here, the funniest point in the tour was also the most terrifying for me, because as Croft took a pause in his monologue, I heard another voice, a small voice that was close to me that said, "The handler is 2 people moving behind each other at once." I turned, expecting to see one of the boys, though their voices were much too deep to produce a tone like that. I looked around, trying to find the source of the voice, but saw no one else. Croft was answering questions from the man and the woman, and the boys were taking photos on their disposable cameras in front of the other gravestones. I tried to explain it away, like some song that had been stuck in my head that had just come back to me. But the voice wasn't singing, and it said words I never could have fashioned myself. In all honesty, I didn't hear much of what Croft had to share as he took Q&A. I do know that Tate burned himself alive in the cemetery, right behind a large pine tree, a stone's throw from where he was buried. When the end of the tour was announced, Croft took a group photo with the Polaroid he had been wearing around his neck and revealed a small guest book he had been carrying, inviting us all to write of our experiences. I didn't intend to write anything until I could debunk this whole thing, but I curiously read some of the reviews. I was interested in what my fellow tourists had written that night. Nothing out of the ordinary. Croft closed the night in the cemetery with parting words he took too much delight in reciting. And if you're feeling a little uneasy, it is normal, but remember, the handler can't leave town, not as a real person. You might see him about tonight, but when you leave Henderson and return home, you'll be safe and sound. He smiled creepily, collecting our flashlights and disappearing behind the cemetery's entrance bend. The two boys quickly followed, expressing their desire to hit up the local dive bar in town, while the couple stayed behind. It was here that I got their names and learned a little about them. Alice and Joe were from Moncks Corner, South Carolina, and were regulars to ghost tours. Proudly, they listed the dozen or so they had taken part in across the country in the last few years, some of which I had already proven false, before excusing themselves back to the RV park. It seems the RV park was the only place for accommodation in town. Alice and Joe seemed surprised that I wasn't following them out, but I assured them I would shortly, and that I just wanted to do a little more exploring before it got too late. The answer seemed good enough for them, and they departed hand in hand, leaving me alone in Henderson Cemetery. I did a quick scan of the tombstones, not recognizing any of the names, and not really seeing any signs of disturbed graves either. This might just be the easiest debunking I'd done. I set up shop on a lone bench in front of a row of 5 cypress trees facing Tate's grave. From this angle, I could pretty much see every plot in the cemetery. Unzipping my backpack, I lifted out a large thermos and took a sip. Sweet, warm coffee tasted good any time of day. I got my laptop out as well and began to type the notes I had scribbled on my notepad throughout the tour. A breeze picked up, making the leaves thrash about in a way that sounded like rain, though the night remained dry. My denim jacket, paired with the warm coffee in my hands, was just warm enough, though I made a note to dress warmer the next night, just in case. It was around midnight that I had stopped typing in order to give my full attention to the scene around me. A few minutes passed. Nothing. No sounds, no movement, no disturbed graves. I smiled, making note of this, and waited another 2 whole hours before deciding I had seen enough. I finished zipping up my backpack when I somehow convinced myself to stay another hour. 3 a.m. being the evil hour enticed me to see if any activity would present itself. For good measure, I stood up and began to loop the graves, paying attention to what could be on the outside of the cemetery as well. All I heard was the wind, and all I saw were darkened graves, lit up by the moon in the sky. Around 3:20 a.m., I packed up and headed back to the RV park for some much-needed rest. Day 2. I was awakened too early the next morning, around 10 a.m., to a knock at my door and a splitting headache. The thin fiberglass door magnified the knock, feeling like a hammer into the side of my head. Squinting, I threw on some jeans and hastily made my way to the door, if only to stop the god-awful knocking. A second before the door opened, I thanked the heavens above for remembering to put on my faded black hat with the blonde hair wig attached. I opened the creaky door and saw Brody standing there, hands on his hips, wearing a brown hoodie and baggy jeans. "Morning," I spoke as cheerfully as I could utter. Checkout is 10 a.m., he said very matter-of-factly. I glanced at my watch, widening my eyes, trying to adjust to the blinding sunlight. It was exactly 10 a.m. It must have rained while I slept, as the ground was damp and raindrops fell slowly off the roof of the RV. Well, I'll be staying another night at least, I told him. I can pay you when I wake up. Brody sighed, folding his arms across his chest. People don't stay longer than 2 days. His voice was stern, uncharacteristic of the Brody I had encountered the day before. He just stared at me. I couldn't tell if he was trying to scare me or was outright threatening me, so I chose the kind of response that came most naturally to me. Smartassery. Well then, you're welcome for my business. I closed the door and staggered back to bed, where I drifted off for another 4 hours. When I next awoke, my headache had subsided a little, but not entirely. My watch read 2 p.m. and my stomach growled. I showered, shaved, and dressed into the infamous red shirt and denim jacket, fitting the hat and wig onto my head. Time to explore this place. Before commencing my short walk downtown, I stopped by the office and kept my word, paying Brody for another night's accommodation. He hardly said a word to me as he took my card and handed me a receipt. I smiled overtly at him and headed down the steps towards the closest cup of coffee I could find. Turns out that the local pub in town was also the local coffee shop. And supermarket. And post office. And library. Though it was about the size of those public libraries you see in people's front yards. I ordered a coffee and a steak sandwich from the red-headed woman who approached my table. She had a stern look on her face, and I was starting to feel like the whole town had it in for me. Could it be that I was recognized? While I waited, I browsed the 30 or so books in the little nook by the bar and found something of interest. Stealing Clothes from the Dead, How Tate Bloom Became the Handler. A 100-page small book with faded edges on the front and back covers. Darting back to my booth, I skimmed the book for the sake of pictures and tried to learn more about it. It was written by a woman called Nancy Ellis, a name I had not heard of in my research yet. The book looked self-published, with all black and white photos, including the one on the cover. The pages were real pages from a printer rather than the softer or thinner pages you get from a professional publisher. I learned from the small paragraph on the back of the book that Nancy still lived in Henderson with her husband and 3 cats. Doesn't she sound lovely? I was about to get stuck into chapter 1 when the red-headed waitress returned with my coffee. It smelled burnt, looked burnt, and I guessed it was about 7 hours old from the brew this morning. I couldn't wait to wrap my lips around that mug. Grateful, I smiled at the woman, instantly tearing open small containers of creamer and dumping them in. She was intent on leaving me and getting back to work when I stopped her to ask, "Would you recommend this book?" I smiled, holding it up for her to get a better look. "If you're into that sort of stuff," she responded flatly. "And you're not, I take it?" She took in a deep breath, putting her hand on her hip. "This town has much more to offer than ghost stories." I nodded, feeling like a fan who had asked his hero the wrong question. "That makes sense. Well, what do you like about Henderson? Can you recommend anything for me to do while I'm here?" "Yeah," she said, nodding and placing her coffee jug down on my table, leaning on it with both hands. "You can turn around and leave." Her smile instantly faded as she scooped up the jug. "What's your problem with me?" I asked before she could walk away. "Honey," she said, making her lips into a thin line and shaking her head. "I don't know you." "Exactly," I said, just loud enough for her to hear me, I think, though she refused to turn around and continue engaging with me. Maybe the locals were sick of this handler stuff. They had had their fair share of ghost-hungry tourists, baited into the tales this town had created in order to monetize their small-town murderer. It makes sense. I drank my coffee way too fast, anticipating the refill that would hopefully come out with my meal, unless Miss Redhead really did have a vendetta against me. I got 2 chapters in before she returned with my sandwich. She refilled my cup without me asking, and I thought it best to say nothing to her. The handler is 2 people moving behind one another at the same time. I heard the voice again. "What?" I asked. She just stared at me and eventually started slowly shaking her head. "What did you say to me?" I asked. "I didn't say nothing." "The handler is 2 people," I started to repeat, but my voice drifted off because I knew the voice that I heard was not the voice of my waitress. Goosebumps pricked on the back of my neck and down my arms. This was the 2nd time I heard this phrase from a voice that sounded so close to me. No coincidence here. Deep in thought, my eyes drifted out the window. It was there I saw Croft, my ghost tour leader, walking in very long strides into an area of town that didn't look like anything. It went straight into the woods. When I looked back, my waitress was gone. I made the split-second decision to pack up my sandwich to go follow Croft. This meant leaving the lady a very generous tip, as I was not able to break a 50. Outside was colder than I expected. I buttoned up my denim jacket and followed Croft as closely as I could. I buttoned up my denim jacket and followed Croft as quickly as I could. There was no sign or even a trail that I could see marking the border of the woods where he disappeared. Where did this lead? The air was even cooler in the woods. It smelled damp, and raindrops slowly fell off the leaves that held them. The sun was kept at bay, shaded by large overhead branches. I quickened my pace until I saw Croft up ahead. I crouched low, trying to keep the noise I made to a minimum. There was no trail here, but it had certainly been walked through multiple times. Branches were cracked. Leaves were shuffled to the side of a small dirt makeshift path patterned with big, white mushrooms. Croft stopped, and I slowed my pace, keeping low, trying not to crunch too many leaves as I followed. I had been walking for about 15 minutes and was approaching a clearing the size of half a football field. In the center of the clearing were a collection of large stumps, laid out in a somewhat organized fashion that displayed something unrecognizable from my current viewpoint. I remained behind a tree, trying to see what Croft was up to. At first, I thought he was taking something from the tree display, but the longer look showed that he was placing something there. I decided to move around 30 feet or so in case he decided to come back the way he came and run straight into me. When I did this, I stepped on a loose branch and it snapped underfoot. I swore under my breath and held still. Back up to a tree, I began to breathe slowly and listened for dear life. Soft footprints approached on the wet grass in the open area, coming closer. I considered jumping out to scare and confront Croft. That seemed like something I would do. But for some reason, after the voice I heard in the cafe, I couldn't shake a feeling of fear. Like perhaps there was something more about this town than I first thought. The footsteps were close now. I could hear Croft breathing. But it was not how a normal person breathed. It was like he was trying to breathe as loudly as he possibly could. He then breathed out for much longer than I have ever heard a person exhale. It was like he had 3 sets of lungs. I closed my eyes and considered bolting out of there, just going straight back to the RV park and getting out of town. I was seconds away from doing it when suddenly the breathing stopped and all was still. It took a few moments to gather myself. Then I peeked out into the open space. No one was there. I did a circle of the trees surrounding the area, expecting to see Croft hiding in wait for me. But from what I could tell, I was alone. I jogged over to the tree stump collection to investigate. Photographs. About 50 of them, I guessed. Every single one of them. A Polaroid with Croft in it. Photos from the ghost tour. My eyes scanned the area where I thought I saw Croft place the latest photo, and I found what I was looking for. It was Croft, the teenage boys, Alice and Joe, and me. Except something was wrong with me. My face had a big red X across it. This feature was not present in any of the other photos on the tree altar. What was Croft's problem with me? Maybe he knew who I was after all. But what was the point of this strange photo display in the middle of the forest? I pocketed the Polaroid, taking a photo for myself of the scene before me, and made my way back to the main street. Though the main drag was small, it felt less unsettling being around civilization again. Even if I had an increasing fear that everyone was out to get me. I decided to wander in the public eye a bit and explore as much as I could. My search took me to a small church on the corner of 21st Street that led back to the highway. The building was white with a red roof and was the smallest church that I'd seen in a while. The sign on the front lawn read, St. Padre Pio's Catholic Church, with a list of service times throughout the week and Sunday. I tried the door and it was open. The building smelled like every church I'd been into, snuffed candles and old wood. The carpet was an old gray color, the pews a dark brown, and over the altar hung a large crucifix where Jesus looked a little bit too much in pain for my liking. It wasn't until I was halfway up the aisle that I noticed someone crouching at the altar, setting up a display of flowers. He stood and greeted me, introducing himself as Father Matthew. I shook his hand and he asked me where I was from. I gave him my rehearsed story, and right away he said, "I'm a fan of your show." What? I just stood there, caught red-handed. "You're a listener of Unsheet?" "Yeah, I love it. I love the approach you take to each case, and I usually agree with you. Anything weird is usually explainable." But if you find yourself in a situation where it's not, I can help. He said the last part of his sentence slowly and seriously. He reached into his pocket and handed me his business card. I couldn't help but smile. A priest with a business card. For some reason, this man seemed genuine, unlike the other people I had encountered in the town, which is why I was more frightened of him than any of the others. I thanked him and made up some excuse to leave and headed back to my RV to regroup. On my walk there, I began eating my sandwich to settle my growling stomach. My watch read 4:12 p.m. Before entering my trailer, I wanted to see if any of the people in my ghost tour group were still in town. There were no other cars in the parking lot, except a small Datsun with a North Carolina license plate. Brody's. Back in my trailer, I realized that I hadn't taken the book about Tate Bloom with me from the cafe. Needing a way to pass the afternoon before the evening's ghost tour, I went back to the cafe to retrieve it. The only two people in that cafe were the waitress whose name I still hadn't learned, and a tall man in a booth by the back window. Croft. Suddenly, feeling a burst of courage, I walked straight over to his booth and slid in across from him. He was reading a newspaper, finishing off a bowl of French fries and a Coke. "So who made up the handler story? It's quite elaborate," I said, throwing the last bite of sandwich into my mouth. Croft's head was still facing the newspaper, but his eyes stared up at me, burning into me. "You think it's all made up? You should start digging up the graves in town. You'll see they're all naked." Brilliant idea. Now, I can't admit to doing this, can I? It's against the law. So I most definitely did not wait up that night and steal a shovel from the small garden shed at the RV park and dig up as many graves as it took for me to be satisfied that the residents in this town were in fact not naked due to ghosts stealing their clothes. Of course not. I had a better idea. And that's why, hypothetically, if I were to engage in this activity, I would do things a little differently and go straight to the source. I would wait until the ghost tour was over, sip my coffee on the same bench I sat the night before, and wait until it was so late that I couldn't hear any residents of Henderson moving about in the moonlight. I would do one last scan of the woods before beginning to dig, and dig, and dig, until my shovel hit a coffin. That sound, that feeling, would be enough to scare me into leaving this town and never return. But I would be so close. Sweaty and tired, I would pry open the lid of the coffin to reveal that it was empty. Now, this is all hypothetical, right? But if I did dig up the handler's coffin and I did find it empty, that would be pretty terrifying, wouldn't it? Of course, I would take photos for proof and list it under this episode's gallery on unsheaththeghost.com. But who knows? It could just be a photo I constructed myself. Day 3. The next morning, I beat Brody to it and was there waiting for him at 9 a.m. when he started his shift with a crisp $100 bill to pay for another night at the Henderson RV park. He gave me change. "You're welcome," I said to him, strolling out the door and directly back to bed. I had planned another night owl journey, which meant that I needed to continue my schedule of sleeping during the day. Time to see what the locals are up to. Around 3 p.m., I took a stroll through town, through a residential area just off the main street. The road was called Milford Lane. The houses were small and somewhat poorly kept. It reminded me of a redneck part of town back home. One older man was at his letterbox, flipping through a small pile of letters. I noticed that one was a bright red envelope. He spotted me right away and glared at me. I nodded and continued on. A block away, there was a younger woman in flannel plaid pajama pants with a pink, fluffy sweater, also getting her mail. I spotted the same red envelope in her hands. I continued down Milford Lane until I saw no sign of anybody in their yard and peeked into the closest mailbox. Sure enough, there was another red envelope sitting on top of the pile. With my hands still in the mailbox, I ripped it open, stuffing the envelope into my jacket pocket and removing the contents. I jogged back all the way to the RV park before I looked at the envelope's contents. Rounding the corner to the RV park, I noticed that a car had arrived. New guests staying the night, likely taking the ghost tour. I stepped up into my RV and locked the door, pulling the contents of the red envelope out of my jacket. It was an image of me, from the Polaroid. It wasn't the whole group. I had been cut out and blown up onto an 8x8 black and white sheet of paper. There was no red X on my face, however. They're after me? I thought, what threat am I? My next thought was perhaps that the town had come to rely on the income of the ghost tours, and that if I had debunked their ghost, they would lose tourism and the small income businesses here received from it. Okay, I thought. Let's play. I threw off my denim jacket and red long-sleeve button-up, tossing my hat and wig on top. I ran a hand over my bald head and got dressed in my favorite Cleveland Browns shirt with a white cap that read, "Unsheet the Ghost." If they know who I am, why hide it anymore? Before breakfast, I headed back to the shrine that I had followed Croft to the day before. I wanted to take better note of the photos on display and see if I had missed anything. But when I arrived, it was gone. The tree stumps were all there, but every photo had been taken away. I started to have this feeling like I was being watched. Instead of heading back to town, I moved deeper into the woods. It was about a 10-minute hike until I found the cabin. Old, falling apart, roof caved in on one side. There was still furniture in it, completely covered in moss and dirt. Though there was one room, however, that still looked somewhat lived in. The bedroom held a closet next to a bed with dark sheets. In the closet, dirty clothes hung on coat hangers. A dresser held a large selection of jewelry, and there were shoes and boots of different sizes for different sexes neatly lined up on the floor. I took as many photos as I could and searched the surrounding area. things just kept getting stranger. After finding nothing more, I headed back to the cafe for lunch, though it was technically breakfast for me. When I entered the main street, I heard something playing over the speakers. It was me. My podcast. I recognized the episode right away. One of my earlier episodes where I debunked the ghost tour in Ellis, Texas, after playing recorded proof of the town mayor admitting it was a hoax. This wasn't coming from the bar. It was playing all over the main street. Small gray speakers attached to light poles amplified my voice, my accent, the real me. I walked into the bar, trying to prepare for anything. "Good to see you yourself again," the waitress said to me. "I'm Tina." The red-headed waitress smiled at me, bringing me a coffee I hadn't yet ordered. I felt like a kid who was being welcomed back into the family after a temper tantrum had sent me to timeout. I smiled and ordered eggs and bacon, grateful for the all-day breakfast, not certain of how I wanted to approach this. Apparently, if I'm just me, I'm a welcome visitor. But how did they know? I'm not that well known. Am I? I decided to ignore the disguise I had on the last 2 days and just chat to Tina, keeping in mind her comments about the town only being known for ghosts. I chatted to her about other things. The history of the cafe, library, post office, favorite places to check out in town. She told me she enjoyed a lunch break walking through the cemetery. The town was generally quiet, but that was the quietest place by far. The breakfast was average, but came in generous portions. After a second coffee, I pulled out my wallet and glanced behind the counter. Tina was talking to an older man up on a bar stool. Or was she? No, she was pretending to talk to the man, opening and closing her mouth like a fish. No sound came out as she stared directly into the man's eyes, both hands on the countertop. I thought I could hear her lips gently smacking together. The man, too, kept opening and closing his lips in slow, deliberate gulps. The wet pop of lips meeting and parting like bubbles rising from the bottom of an aquarium. I quickly directed my gaze elsewhere, afraid of being caught witnessing this strange interaction. I left $20 on my table this time, thankful to Brody for providing me with change. Ghost or not, something was not right here. It was as if everyone in town received another memo about me, because suddenly everyone was very friendly. I received smiles on the street. The man in charge of the small library had me rent a few other books out of good faith, despite me not having a library card. There was no ghost tour that Sunday evening. It only ran on Fridays and Saturdays. That night, I stayed at the cemetery until 2 a.m. This made it 3 nights in a row, with no ghost, no dug-up graves, no disturbances whatsoever. Crickets accompanied me on my short walk back to the RV. Unlocking the door, I was surprised to see a light flickering in the window. Climbing into the main living space, I saw that it was a candle lighting up the bedroom. Was Brody in the back of my RV? I didn't have a weapon on me. Frankly, I had never needed one. But at that moment, I wished with all my heart I had traveled with at least a knife. I slowly crept to the back of the RV. I tried a few light switches along the way, but they weren't working. Approaching the bed, I saw something on the pillow. Stepping closer, I learned that it was an old set of false teeth. A wet patch underneath them stained the center of the navy blue pillowcase. I spun around, expecting to find someone in the RV with me, but I was seemingly alone. Brody was my main suspect. He had grown increasingly hostile toward me. I assumed that this was his idea of a prank, so I immediately started thinking of retribution. It took me a second to collect myself. Placing my hand inside the pillowcase, I held onto the teeth and removed the pillow from inside the case. Exiting the RV, I walked over to the office, candle and teeth in hand, and surprisingly found the door open. As quietly as I could, I climbed the steps and walked over to the register. Placing the bronze candlestick down on the counter, I dropped the teeth directly onto the register. Immediately, Brody rose up from behind the counter, flipping my heart over. I let out a short cry. "What the hell?" I yelled. Brody started opening his mouth and closing it, smacking his lips together, staring at me blankly. No sound came out for a full 20 seconds, it seemed. I just stared at him, disgusted and annoyed, and increasingly, the fear I was unsure about all day began to grow. In a very soft voice, almost inaudibly, Brody spoke. "At my 40th birthday, I invited a childhood friend named Alex. He brought a friend who didn't say anything the entire party." His mouth continued opening and closing, with no sound emerging. His sentence hung in the air. I swallowed a giant lump in my throat. "Stay away from me, and don't ever go into my RV again with your sick pranks." My voice shocked me as it broke and wavered. "If you want to live, leave now," he said, monotone and blankly. Ignoring his threat, I left the office quickly and jogged back to my RV. I locked the door and was reminded that the power was out when I tried the light switch. Kicking myself for leaving the candle back in the office, I dug through my backpack to find the 2 flashlights I had brought with me, one being a headlamp. I had a decision to make. I could get out of this town right now and never look back. But I still felt that I needed answers, or rather, I felt that if I left now, it would be due to fear, which would mean that perhaps there was something supernatural going on in this town that I hadn't quite encountered yet, strange town folk aside. One more night, I told myself. Just one more night. In the morning, I would confront Brody and Tina and maybe go back and visit Father Matthew to ask him about the strange things I had encountered. I needed to leave having my mind made up, not someone forcing me or threatening me to leave. In the light of the headlamp, I got dressed for bed and even had the nerve to brush my teeth. So far, everything I had encountered in this town could be explained by the minds of people trying to mess with me. People wearing sheets, saying boo, Nothing supernatural at all. I shook my head and smiled. They know who I am. Of course they're trying to mess with me. Tomorrow I would lay it on them. No more Mr. Nice Chet. Sleep came after 30 minutes of tossing and turning. I awoke around 3:30 a.m. to a large bang on the side of my RV. My dream state made it seem louder than a gunshot. I rolled out of bed and onto the floor, peering over the bed through the small window where the sound came from. There were people outside in the park. I could make out 2 figures in the dark. Or was it 3? It looked like someone was running behind 2 figures. But not toward me, not toward anywhere in particular. Just back and forth, doing short bursts of sprinting, hiding behind the 2 leaders. I crawled over to the window to get a closer look. I saw what I assumed to be a man and a woman, due to their frames and how they walked, with black masks on as they approached the RV. They were tall and walked methodically, the swing of their arms matching each other. I got a closer look now at the person hiding behind them, running back and forth between them as they approached. As the 3 slowly came closer, I saw that their masks were not black at all. They each had a pair of circular eyes glued on. They looked like those googly eyes you buy at a dollar store. The ones where the black pupil bounces around. Paralyzed for what felt like minutes, I knew that this wasn't a prank. I was going to die right then and there. Suddenly, another huge bang erupted on the side of the RV. It shook and I screamed, being thrown back onto the bed. Quickly, I dressed myself. I threw on my red shirt and denim jacket and packed my backpack, not wanting to leave behind any evidence I had collected. I almost left my faded black cap, but grabbed it at the last second. When I opened the door to the RV, the figures were about 20 feet away from me. I bolted to my car door, turned the key in the ignition, and sped out of there. As I left, I passed right by them, their eyes bouncing around on those poorly made masks, the 3rd figure remaining hidden, seeming to move at an impossible speed. I swear to you, with the windows up and even being 10 feet away, I could hear the smacking of their lips as they opened and closed their mouths to me like circus clown heads. I stared terrified at them for a split second too long as an arm came down on my trunk and shattered my paralysis, causing me to jump so high I hit my head on the car roof. I sped out of there, going at a speed I never knew my car could reach so quickly. That's the story of my time in Henderson. Now that I've been home for a few weeks and I had time to process everything, my findings show that there was nothing but an elaborate prank that they likely play on most tourists. You can visit the show's website to see the photos and videos I documented during those 3 days and see for yourself. This has been Unsheet the Ghost. I'm Chet, and if you liked what you heard today, please consider listening to any and all past episodes available on our website at unsheettheghost.com.
Sets out for a nighttime hike.
That wasn't me. The voice that you just heard on my podcast was lower than I usually... Remember what I said about the baby in the crib? Have you ever been possessed before, Father? I looked you up online, and not much is written about exorcism and the like. But I called my local diocese and attended one of their spiritual discernment committee meetings. Very formal. I don't think a single one of them believes in a God who can get this man out of me. But you seem to. I will not go back to that town. Will you come to me? I know why they call him the Handler. I can feel his hands around every single one of my thoughts, hiding behind them. That large, black, charred face bending down from the sky, smiling, knowing he could take me over at any second.